Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we'll be reading The Black Anglo-Saxons by Nathan Hare, starting on page 35, The Mimics.
Greetings. My name is the Revolutionary Matron, and my show is called The Learning Curve. I broadcast on a network called KWAZ Radio. There are other hosts on the network I'd like you to meet.
Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, inviting you to tune in to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed here belong solely to the respondent, and they do not necessarily reflect any broadcast networks, affiliates, nor sponsors. The Learning Curve is a broadcast created for the benefit of my global community. Black is a consciousness. Content is being used for our commentary, research, criticism, education, scholarship, teaching, preaching, and news reporting. No copyright infringement is intended. I will make enunciation mistakes. I will give you my opinion about the information. And if you ever ask, I will send you my source.
The Mimics. Mimics are the close kin of the image makers and are especially prevalent among school teachers and white-collar workers. They chronically imitate white mannerisms in the quest for a feeling of similarity or closeness to their white ideal. As whites do, they do. Shut out of white society for the most part, they use skillful mimicry as a means of sharing vicariously in what they conceive to be its delights. What they cannot accomplish in reality, they gain through wishful thinking, backed up with the biblical reference that as a man thinketh, so he is. Individuality is traded for conformity and robotism, and Negro virtues and vices are exchanged for their white counterparts. A mimic minister recently cited as proof that Negro churchgoers are every bit the equal of their white peers the fact that Negro congregations can speak the same language, sing the same hymns, discuss the same issues, attack the same problems, and support churches in the same style, even if they can't support the same churches. The life of a mimic is, accordingly, one endless duplication of white society. He has reached the point where he does not want to be regarded as different and is especially sensitive to any suggestion of a difference between whites and Negroes. A Negro marketing analyst, after enumerating differences in the consumer behavior of whites and Negroes, added defensively, "This is not to say that Negroes live in a manner dissimilar from other Americans." Sameness has become synonymous with equality, and too often this type of orientation will dampen the mimic's enthusiasm for opposing the corruption of society. He fears seeming different. Said a medical student in the South, "It has taken me until my junior year to suddenly realize that I really am the same as everyone else. I don't feel the need to fight about it anymore. I just know it." And so, The mimic conforms to white norms in the expectation that the elimination of all ostensible differences between the races will eradicate the socioeconomic discrimination now suffered by his race. Having unconsciously accepted the eternal superiority of the white world, he naturally proceeds to imitate his transcendent supermodel. In its details, the aping of white behavior by mimics often amounts to a burlesque. A white accent, for example, is taken to represent a high degree of association with the better class of whites. In the effort to talk like a white person, mimics, when speaking publicly or to strangers, affect a snarl or twang imitative of whites. If you listen long enough, however, you are likely pronounced to hear an I pronounced as ah, as well as other telltale signs of their Southern origins. In reality, their contact with whites is mostly limited to public functionaries, such as telephone operators and radio and television announcers. Therefore, they are led, even in private conversation, to imitate the artificial, British tinged articulation of white public formality. Mimics derive prestige on a scale based on the similarity of their speech to the white model. Mimics with maids, usually babysitters but referred to as maids or housekeepers, will hold the domestic to the same stiff requirements of talking as much like white people as possible. Mimics frequently express fears that their maids will transmit their Southern Negro accents to the mimic's Black Anglo-Saxon children just learning to talk. This likelihood is greater than it seems, since the maid is with the children all day or more waking hours than their parents are. The latter, after coming home from work, often for a salary little higher than the maid's, often rush off again to social obligations. Mimics mock in private conversation the Southern Negro's brogue of friends and relatives, whom they struggle to avoid in the presence of whites. Although most are unfamiliar with the more advanced Negro poets, such as M.B. Tolson, they loathe and condemn leading poets of the Langston Hughes variety, who are said to merely reproduce the jargon of the Negro. Interestingly, this contempt for Southern speech is not carried over to the accent of the white Southerner. In fact, a mimic on the faculty of the leading Negro university in New Orleans recently wrote an article for the Journal of Negro Education, the winter of 1963, in which she admonished Southern Negroes to discard their dialect for that of the more standard Southern speech, contending that it is corrupt and illiterate speech, not the skin coloring, which can be the chief reminder of the slave inheritance of the American ghettos. In the future, she urged Negroes to procure tape recorders, learn phonetic principles, and through an enormous effort, work toward breaking down this last and most formidable barrier. A number of Negroes known to me in the South have been long engaged in a feverish mimicry of the Southern whites' twang and regional peculiarities of pronunciation. Mimics, North and South, who have mastered such habits of speech, look upon themselves as the only Negroes around who can talk, and they are the first to say so. I have known more than a few female mimics in the North who, because of their past experiences as domestics in the South, had enough contact with whites to perfect a white Southern dialect. This they clung to in the North as a mark of distinction. Whereas most Negroes regard the white Southerner's accent with the amusement and disdain, the mimic considers it rather cute, particularly if used by a colored woman. A black Anglo-Saxon woman with a white Southern accent generally enjoys the sweet fruit of being likened to a Southern white belle. Men will adopt such verbal gems as yums and yunses for you and yours in imitation of Southern whites. But while the mimic cherishes a white Southern accent, when northern bound with a Southern Negro accent, she struggles increasingly to lose it as she draws near the northern destination. Old habits, however, are not so easily discarded. The mimic is beset by constant setbacks, especially when she begins to meet people and feel enough at home to relax her front behavior. Greetings, forecast. Thanks for tuning in. On vacation trips back home to the South, mimics chirp like a Northern Symphony's warm up for the first days, basking in the envious comments of neighbors who are also mimics or mimic admirers. But they eventually forget themselves and revert to their old way of talking. This leads to an even greater frenzy to rid themselves of their past speech habits. Others, who have never been out of the South, let alone the country, acquire British accents, as is the case of one school teacher compensating for her inability to find work in Oklahoma. The mimic's copycat impulse is not restricted to speech. For example, those who have never seen the inside of a Catholic church will dutifully eat fish on Friday. In general, there is an effort to acquire the mannerisms and personal characteristics prevalent among whites in their region. Mimics in the South, for example, boast of their Southern hospitality. A woman returning to the South on vacation will be praised by her mimic kinsmen as possessing a balanced blend of Southern charm and Yankee drive. This quest to absorb white regional traits will, for instance, bring praise to Boston mimics for proficiency in one of the highest forms of art, snobbery. Others return for vacation trips with California airs or Chicago manners. Those who have just returned from 2 weeks tours of Europe are cheered for their Parisian charm. Texas mimics strive to become perennial boasters, and others are said even to follow the sun and return again home with California and Miami tans. Some avoid the summer sun to retain as much of a visible semblance to whiteness as possible. Others, of dark tan hue, delighting in reporting that no matter how much they stay out in the sun, they just can't seem to get a tan. Enthusiasm for aping white behavior sometimes pervades the most personal, intimate aspects of the mimic's life. Married mimics, for example, are prone to hold up white men or women as ideals to their mates. When a female mimic's husband fails to open a car door in the classic gentlemanly style, she is apt to berate him with the statement, "Now a white man would have opened the door for his wife." Male mimics, however, are more likely to act the role of a gentleman than whites are at present. Many wives complain of an inability to get mimic husbands to do much, do so much as lift a broom around the house, unless white guests are present. This is the time when they will bend over backward to appear courteous and helpful. When a male mimic's wife does something that bothers him, he is likely to tell her, "Wouldn't nobody but a colored woman do that?" By the same token, when a female mimic is peeved with her spouse, she also talks about his heredity or makes the declaration that his type is generally no account anyway. Male and female mimics each project blame for the current plight of the race on the other. Women say the race would gain equality and of opportunity if the men would stand up to white men. Males rationalize and complain that only the Negro woman and the white man are truly free in the United States. Some unmarried female mimics boast that they won't have much to do with the Negro man because he don't have nothing to give you or won't do nothing for you, meaning that he can't afford to squander money on them. Mimic female gold diggers, acting on this disdain for Negro men, frequently acquire white sponsors or sugar daddies. These men pay their rent or maintain charge accounts at exclusive clothing stores in return for clandestine sexual favors or intermittent escape from the white community. Such a woman derives prestige from being sustained in idleness by a white sponsor of sufficient wealth to set her down, that is, free her from mandatory work. Mimics not blessed with white sponsors obtain vicarious thrills by merely watching a sponsored mimic walk into an exclusive store where they themselves are menially employed and proudly charge something to a wealthy white man's account. Greetings, Anthony McPhail. Thanks for tuning in. A few not proficient in the exploitation of love and sex will journey to Africa and seek to act like whites among the natives there. This necessitates an about face on their part prior to the recent emergence of African countries in the world of nations. Mimics either ignored Africa altogether or scoffed at her diplomats and leaders on their visits in America. Most, then as now, adopted Europe as their mother or stepmother country. But now that whites are taking notice of Africa and according her respect, mimics are increasingly doing the same. Too many mimics, it is not enough to merely act like whites. One must also look like them as much as possible. This applies especially to female mimics, though it is by no means unknown among men. Some, usually the products of barefoot farm days during which their feet grew freely, now cramp their feet into shoes that are too small merely because they have heard it said that whites have smaller feet than Negroes. Others diet themselves into poor health in a frantic effort to approximate the comparatively flat, hipped anatomy of their white idols. Mimics copy the conspicuous and often the more ridiculous elements of white makeup, tinting their hair blonde one week and brunette the next, then back to red or even purple, with no regard for the color of their skin. Ebony recently reported in December of 1962 that spot surveys by a number of leading wig manufacturers show an impressively large number of Negro women are having an extra head of hair than whites, not to mention wig caps. Mimics also ridicule Negro women who do not follow their example. One distraught victim wrote to the editor of a Negro weekly that I wear my hair natural and find that it is not the white person, the one I expect, but the mimic who is taken aback and becomes wide-eyed by this, as if my type of hair is unknown to them. Indeed, the Negro who dares to comment on the beauty of the colored woman's freshly washed hair before it has been all fixed will be laughed away or condemned as a black supremacist. When Sepia magazine in January of 1962 printed a picture of jazz singer Dakota Stanton wearing her hair all natural, a mimic reader in Philadelphia wrote a letter of protest to the editors. She stated that she was disappointed and ashamed of Miss Stanton. Greetings, Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Mimics prefer to spend millions of dollars for various concoctions called hair grease and bleaching cream in an effort to look more like whites. Conversely, whites soak up suntan oils and sunbaking ointments to render themselves darker. Mimics long even more frenetically and poignantly for invisibility and sameness in the social sphere. From time to time, they may be found hopefully applauding scientific progress in the production of a pill which could control skin color and provide the Earth's people with a common and neutral complexion. What a dull, drab, and unattractive world that would be. The outlook of the female mimic presents problems even when she is purchasing cosmetics. She wants only specially mixed face powder since that is what high-class whites use. Also, it provides a sense of importance to have some visible being preparing something especially for her. But since she rejects such tones as nut brown and other shades reasonably or objectively close to her own particular hue, the discussion invariably ends in a squabble with the clerk or mixer. The mimic is not always aware of the source of his or her behavior, for it is governed by what the eminent psychologist Gordon Allport calls a functional autonomy of motives. Allport suggests, among other things, that a person takes to something for one reason which may or may not be apparent to him, but later comes to believe that he likes or dislikes the thing for its own sake. Thus, mimics may initially imitate some nonsensical behavior because it is fashionable among whites, but then later come to believe that they selected the fad or triviality for its inherent qualities. This Allport syndrome lies beyond the shameless intramural prejudice and discrimination of which Black Anglo-Saxons are guilty of. Some have gone so far in their adjustment to the white status quo as to segregate Negroes from whites in their own places of business. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, for example, there is a barbecue cafe at Pine and Greenwood Street, which was segregated for years, although owned and operated by Negroes. Whites sat on the east and Negroes on the west. A drive-in theater in the same state does not admit Negroes, although it is owned by a Negro. Miss Daisy Bates, president of the Arkansas NAACP during the Little Rock events of 1957, led a picket line of about 30 Negroes, only 5 years later, against a Negro-owned business. It had refused service to Negroes in the air-conditioned white dining room. The indignant mimic proprietor swore defiantly that nobody was going to force me to do something when I know I'm doing the right thing. Diversity among Negroes is glorified as an end in itself by mimics who approve Negro similarity only when Negroes are similar to whites. Unwilling to differ from the general herd, particularly the white one, They are swiftly becoming white men with black faces. They voluntarily imprison themselves without question or opposition in the whites' lack of freedom, adopting the norms and standards which Eric Fromm has diagnosed as representing collective neurosis. This point was brought out rather well in one of Ollie Harrington's Bootsy cartoons. Bootsy and a friend are standing, looking timidly down a long ski drop. Bootsy is saying, "Now hold it, cuz. You know I'm willing to do anything to help the race advance. But tell me, do Dr. Bunch do foolishness like this?" So as you can see, the mimic mimics the ridiculous parts of white culture, and sometimes they're not even aware of the fact that they're mimicking white culture. The cultured. We're on page 43. Uncle Toms are fastidiously known now in some circles as Dr. Thomases. Some social scientists, such as Carter G. Woodson in his Miseducation of the Negro and E. Franklin Frazier in Black Bourgeoisie, have detected the emergence of what might be termed as a degree class. These are individuals who derive their prestige from holding a degree, however petty or honorary. The degreed are typically employed as school teachers, social workers, and church pastors. That their salaries are often lower than a mill hand leads to strange dilemmas and resentments. Negro janitors, for example, commonly find it necessary to tell off some of their high-class Black Anglo-Saxon tenants for trying to boss them around. The degree mania has also infected the ministry. Many ministers are referred to as Dr. So-and-so or the Reverend thus and such, even when they have neither an honorary nor an earned doctorate. Doctor has become virtually synonymous in the mind of the typical congregation with outstanding minister. Many Black Anglo-Saxons connive and clamor for honorary degrees from small Southern seminaries, which are not equipped to confer even a sound bachelor's degree. Similarly, such institutions will dangle honorary degrees before famed baseball players, vocalists, and jazz musicians in order to entice them into appearing at graduation ceremonies. At the recent commencement exercises of a beauty college, 165 beauticians were awarded honorary doctor's, master's, and bachelor's degrees in cosmetology. The dissemination of cultural status is often merely semantic. Anyone who can play a church hymn, for example, is referred to as an accomplished musician. The holder of a Bachelor of Science degree is said to have a finished education, an apt description. Admission to certain social clubs hinges on a college degree. One such organization for cultured females, called perhaps significantly the Drifters, consists of 13 persons with plain, ordinary old bachelor's degrees, and 3 with master's and 1 with a doctorate. In fact, the degree class is seldom interested in scholarly matters because they have abandoned us. Books would seldom enter their homes were it not for Book of the Month clubs and installment plan classics. Nonetheless, the home-owning variety are beginning to acquire studies. These are usually equipped with plush bar facilities, a sofa, and a small but conspicuous bookstand usually containing a shelf or two of textbooks salvaged from their college days. The chief activities performed in these studies are drinking and catnaps and lounging, called relaxing, in that order. In spite of much classical education of the cultured, wrote Carter G. Woodson some 30 years ago, we do not find in the race a large supply of thinkers and philosophers. The habit of imitation is not conducive to creativity and originality. This continues to be true, even though they have flooded the areas of theology, sociology, anthropology, philosophy, and so on. That they gravitate to these fields is not only due to the lack of opportunity elsewhere, but also because of their special need for answers to the society which has produced them. So they study these subjects in an attempt to find answers to the problems of society, but then they don't do the thinking that's necessary to answer these questions. You know? Many, as with their white counterparts, compensate for their own lack of scholarship by driving their children into frantic grade making and to excellence in the superficial aspects of scholarship. A 2-year-old child, for example, was given nationwide publicity as the world's youngest library card holder. It was not said whether she had ever checked out a book, since among the cultured, the card alone is sufficient as a symbol of scholarship. Even at a typical house party of educators, a budding discussion will be quickly cut short. The would-be debaters will move to another room where they may resume their efforts to learn the latest teenage dance crazes, such as the monkey, the twist, and the cha-cha. It is true that the twist has demonstrated some capacity for arousing the energies of most Negro and white adults, but its acceptance by whites is taken by the Black Anglo-Saxon to be an irreproachable justification for his own enthusiasm. Black Anglo-Saxons are quick, however, to profess a passion for the cultured things of life, especially the aesthetic. They require little provocation to let you know that they hardly ever listen to the blues or that monkey music, but rather they go in for symphonies, which they collect from subscription record clubs and place on the top of their record stacks, because they're all imitating what they think white people do. Underneath, hidden from immediate view, will lurk a more groovy number. Some friends of mine who were music majors once gave a party for a group of classmates. An impressive stack of long-playing symphonic records led off the musical fare. But at last, as the guests sighed with boredom amid the strains of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the hostess privately complained to me of the somber mood of the party, bemoaning her apparent failure. And they don't even like the white stuff that they pick up. They just doing stuff because they think white people do it too. And they want to be like white people. So I inched over to the phonograph, reached under the stack, and put on Little Richard's Slipping and Sliding. Suddenly the party came to life. The music majors forgot their fuse and counterpoint to snap their fingers and stamp their feet, although many later remarked that this was the first time they had ever heard of Little Richard. Others who began with their parties with jazz invariably ended up with such stalwarts as Ray Charles and Bo Diddley. Even in jazz, they soberly profess specialized tastes, claiming a disdain for that funky stuff, while professing a preference for Brubeck or some other white jazz man. Again, they didn't want to listen to that. When the Mona Lisa was in Washington on loan from France, the culture came all the way from Chicago, Texas, and points west to catch a glimpse of it, although for many it was their first and possibly last time to visit an art museum. They professed their eagerness to pay tribute to this gracious lady from France who was painted in 1503 and to its enormous historical significance. When a national group of beauticians, with delegates representing some 40,000 paid members, met in Washington, a spokesman announced that the confab had many civic projects on the agenda, but all was soon forsaken for the National Gallery of Art and the Mona Lisa. They pointed out that they had missed the painting when they were last in Paris. Naturally, we enjoyed seeing her in our own country. Langston Hughes' character, Simple, said he had thought at first that the Mona Lisa was colored. He should have known better. He added than to think that the Black Anglo-Saxon public would make all that fuss about a colored woman. Although most took to pains to flaunt their appreciation of the painting, the most learned thing they could come up with was that, like the old family portrait of Grandma, its eyes follow you anywhere you go in the room. In spite of the intensity of the Black Anglo-Saxons' aesthetic pretense, they have made no original contribution to the arts. Working class Negroes developed America's primary contributions to music, jazz, blues, and spirituals, which are loved and appreciated the world over. Until recently, both middle and lower class Black Anglo-Saxons looked with contempt on these musical forms. Nat Hentoff, the white jazz authority, few are Negro and none are Black Anglo-Saxon, once wrote a letter to the editor of the Washington Afro-American, decrying the fact that Negro intellectuals have tended to regard jazz as not dignified enough for them or their concept of themselves. Hentoff pointed out that whereas a number of white colleges offer serious courses in jazz, colored colleges have disdained it. Indeed, they have frowned on this music being played anywhere on the campus. However, as whites developed an appreciation for jazz, many Black Anglo-Saxons began accepting it and trying to claim credit for it. At present, a continuous battle rages over the relative contributions of whites and Negroes to the development of this music. But for the most part, the Black Anglo-Saxons' ambivalence toward jazz lingers on. So what he's saying is that these people are in positions of influence and power to direct curriculum, and they disregarded jazz until jazz gained white acceptance. And once it gained white acceptance, they began trying to claim it for themselves, although none of them know a thing about jazz. Cultured individuals who once laughed at the blues and sneered at hillbillies as being without class or culture are slowly beginning to recognize their merits and to play up the kinship between Negro blues and white country and Western music. Here, as in jazz, whites are giving these forms increased attention. At exclusive gatherings of top society folk, you can now sit back and watch some 20 couples lined up on a patio, busily executing the wobble and the watusi. They are unaware that a good many of such dance crazes were imported from the southern backwoods as well as from Miami and Baltimore. Whereas It once was a mark of status to be the smoothest dance couple on the floor. This acclaim now goes to the best twisters at Virginia Beach or some other integrated locale. Local professionals acquire community fame for their unique version of the twist, which they perfect to demonstrate how much they are in the modern swing of things. But since they are generally latecomers to the twist, having learned it first from the whites, their styles are a burlesque of the pioneer Negro twisters. Similarly, the society sections of Black Anglo-Saxon newspapers and magazines boast of baton twirling champions as largely white colleges. At a recent convention of beauty culturalists, the first prize winner of the Talent Night contest attained her lofty distinction by being the only individual out of 100 participants able to spell Roentgen as the discoverer of the X-ray. Proficiency in such obscure and useless knowledge is keenly appreciated by the cultured. Small Negro colleges controlled by Black Anglo-Saxons frequently sport big marching bands, with prestige being measured by the size of their membership. Schools with less than 1,000 students think nothing of putting 100-man bands out on the field. These students spend much time learning gymnastic gyrations, such as how to form dark sunshades like those worn by Ray Charles, or how to do the twist while simultaneously marching and playing their instruments, and are consequently regarded as a greater attraction than the football team. During halftime shows, rest periods, the home team ensemble stages a battle of the bands with the visiting group. Because of all this, Black Anglo-Saxon colleges of the A&M, the agricultural and mechanical variety, are known informally as athletics and music colleges. They still doing that to this day, the battle of the bands. Culture is the specific content of civilization and is usually thought of in terms of its highest achievements, the fine arts. But it includes all customs, including dress, eating habits, ways of speaking, and so on, which form the concept generally called good manners. Many Black Anglo-Saxons have reduced culture to a matter of manners aped from the whites. Aped means copied from the whites. Since many of the upper class manners of whites are related to affluence and what Veblen called conspicuous consumption, the mimicry of the Black Anglo-Saxon becomes Vebletine burlesque. Culture in these circles means keeping up with the worst traits of the Joneses, and the white Joneses at that. That's why there's this luxury culture among poor and impoverished people where they want to have a car, but they want to have a Benz or a $200,000 car, but they live in a $30,000 rented shack. Or they have this debt culture where they will go into debt to look good and have on all of these shoes or gold chains or clothes, these luxury items, but they don't have any real assets, no savings. So they're keeping up with the worst traits of the white Joneses. I have known cultured wives who put their husbands through periodic dry runs in that family at the family table, privately practicing eating or future public dinner parties. These are formal, although dark suits are the norm. When a cultured host or hostess desires to ensure the exclusiveness of the affair, she designates tales. The affluent among the cultured evidence a passion for country clubs called Town Club in one of the exclusive housing projects in Chicago, as members prefer not to be reminded of their country roots. Golf and yacht clubs have a similar appeal. A typical club of yacht owners contains small storekeepers, policemen, beauty shop operators, government employees, mailmen, and postal clerks. The enthusiasm for golf is so great that a local weekly, without even a full time reporter, may carry a golf editor. His column revolves around Negro golfers and their past and projected golf ends. You may see these sportsmen on a summer's day with one lone putting iron, or a dime store tennis racket flung across their flung across their shoulders, strolling upon the field of battle. The belated enthusiasm for tennis as a prestige activity led one Oklahoma group to overlook local high school basketball and wrestling stars of statewide and national importance in order to name as most outstanding athlete a tennis player. Although this young fellow did compete in two tennis tournaments, with whites no less, he lost both of them. Cultured Black Anglo-Saxons have glorified the capacity for wasting time and the consumption of fancy liquors to such a degree that bartenders are now in demand as mixologists. That's going on to this day. They are treated with the awe usually reserved for a leading scientist. Conspicuous time-wasting pursuits are also evident in the eating habits and cuisine. The cultured will point out that it takes time to develop a taste for certain delicacies. This is never said of chitlins, for which they have had a taste nearly all their lives. The preference is to load their tables with foreign and American delicacies capped off by champagne sips. This desperate pursuit of the trivial exemplifies the mentality which motivates slum school teachers to develop flute bands for underprivileged children. This type of project is ideal for the dissipation of their energies, being both unique and exotic. At the same time, it is worthless in terms of future employment, especially in discriminating symphony orchestras. So they come in and give these kids a love or a passion for playing some obscure instrument, and they can't get a job afterwards. Engrossed as the cultured are in prevailing fads and foibles, they readily become connoisseurs of Western styles. One cultured Black Anglo-Saxon from the Mississippi Bayou country, left recently for Africa. Her mission? To teach African women how to combine their traditional attire with Western styles and makeup. She proposed to offer courses in Western hairstyling and dressmaking, which she believed to be a high help to the women in Africa. In the area of language, the cultured have developed a tongue of their own. That this argot is not limited to Black Anglo-Saxons is delightfully evident in Fowler's classic, A Dictionary of Modern English Usage. See, for example, his comparison of normal words and gentilisms. Since our present concern is with Black Anglo-Saxons, a brief representative vocabulary of the cultured is herewith presented. The culturess will say, married in matrimony, united in matrimony. In English, it means married. Nuptials versus wedding, position versus job, social service post versus casework job, femme versus woman, gent versus man, mater versus mother, madame versus Mrs., cosmetician versus perfume salesman, tonsorial shop versus barber shop, natal day versus birthday, culinary expert versus good cook. In sum, we may say that the cultured Black Anglo-Saxon is a long way down the road of over assimilation, but as he is under accepted by those whose approval is the object of his cherished expectations, this discrepancy between two very important aspects of his social adjustment has left him without much personal equilibrium. In this basically unsynchronized predicament, he grows ever more crudely incoherent. So when we're looking at the cultured, they again appreciate everything to do with white culture and nothing to do with Black culture. Let me go back to these comments. When I was reading earlier, Anthony McPhail said Dr. Sowell. He says he was referring to the reading of the verse about the Uncle Toms being referred to as Dr. Thomases. White musicians co-opted the blues and called it country and western. And the forecast says, in the words of 3-6, you riding clean, but your gas tank on E. When he talks about these cultured people, they ride really well and they look good. They do all of these interesting things, but they don't have the money to back it up, and they're just copying what they think they see of white people. They're just copying what they think white people do. They're copying their idea of what white people are. Unfortunately, they don't have any real reason. They don't have any real grounding reasons to copy these white people, but they are copying these white people. That's what a mimic does, and that's what the culture do. And they look down on everything that has to do with Black people. Well, guys, that is it for tonight. We read about the mimics, all of these different aspects of Black Anglo-Saxon actually are mimics. They're picking aspects of white culture and they're copying it as best they know how. Sometimes they copy it based on their imagined sense of whiteness, and sometimes they copy it based on what they see white people do. But they don't have closeness or proximity to whiteness. They want closeness and proximity to whiteness. Other authors have talked about the fact that the Negro or the Black person or the African American, however you want to call us, copies the very worst of white culture because we have so much proximity to them living decadent lives because we don't see them living their everyday lives. We see them in restaurants and in Pullman cars. We see them in offices, and we know that they are part of country clubs or town clubs. And we copy that behavior thinking that we are somehow uplifting ourselves by copying their mannerisms. So the forecast enjoyed the reading, and he says, definitely a bunch of Uncle Toms. They are definitely a bunch of Uncle Toms. They are definitely a bunch of Uncle Toms. And they're trying to emulate something and copy something that they don't even understand. So they're and that's actually a part of being African. where you create something new based on your impression or understanding or ideal of a thing, and they're just creating the very worst possible white person they could create, because they're creating a white person in blackface that is a spendthrift, that is part of consumerism, that is a person that doesn't believe in some of the virtues and aesthetics that make us black beautiful, strong, proud, and powerful. So as they copy these behaviors, they're putting themselves in debt because they want it to look good. They want to keep this job. They want to do what they see their white bosses do. All right. I want to thank the Pro Black Perspective. I want to thank the Bitter Medicine Podcast for being here, Anthony McPhail and the Forecast. I want to thank Brother Bakari. I know he's listening. I know that Oni from the Pro Black Perspective is listening. I know that Raw is listening with the elders. I know that KW Don 7 is listening. I know that Bawana Haguziki is listening. And you. Yes, you. I know that you're listening too. And I appreciate you. Oh, hold on. Greetings.
Hey, how you doing, Matron?
I'm all right. How you doing, Anthony McPhail?
I'm doing fine. Hey, I know you're going to get off, and I didn't want to hold you long. I just wanted to show you something. I was reading wrong with you. I got the book.
Oh, okay. Wonderful.
Yeah, I got the book.
Wonderful.
So, yeah, I just wanted to let you know I was paying attention. I was right there with you.
Exactly. Well, thank you. It's good to know that you were right there with me. We got to get some sponsorships for these books, you know?
Yes, ma'am.
We need to read these books and have them in our libraries and
Yeah.
discuss them, because these different black people, these different groups of black people trying to be the ones that are held out as the example of how we should behave are really problematic for us,
Yeah,
because they're so busy trying to get white acceptance and integration into white society that they do us more harm than good.
exactly. Yes, ma'am. I ain't gonna hold you up, Matron. I just wanted to show you I had the book.
Well, thank you, Anthony. I appreciate you for coming on.
Okay, all right now.
All right. So as you can see, some people are reading along with us. Hopefully you are enjoying this reading. I thank each and every one of you for being here, and I will see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we will go into the sociables. This is probably going to talk more about those Jack and Jill clubs and those fashion shows and the different things that Black people have done in an attempt to imitate white society. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Have a nice night. Peace.